Hi, this is Larry Harnisch with yet another Steve Hodel reaction video. Steve was interviewed by the From the Void podcast. This podcast is not true crime. It is ranked 48th in the US in astronomy because it deals with UFOs and whatnot. And I suppose it's safe to say that Steve Hodel at this point is from another planet. Just for fun, just because I've done several of these and I know what Steve is going to say, I always think anyhow, but he surprises me. I thought I'd try Steve Hodel Bingo. And here's my scorecard. I didn't do all that great. I didn't get 5 in a row anywhere, but this is only part one. I may do part two, I may not. But I have to wonder at this point if podcasts just have Steve on the show to see what crazy stuff he's going to say, because his claims are really, really bizarre. Now, in this program, for example, Steve talks about a tigress in India that killed at more than 400 people before it was shot in 1907. 1907 is the year that his father was born. Was George Hodel the reincarnation of this tigress? I mean, what? Steve is just goofy. And he also gets into his map torture phase. And let me emphasize that Steve Hodel stole this idea from somebody else. And the idea is that there's this sort of weird tortured symmetry of different street names. And Steve stole this. And the way it works is this. Steve will say that Elizabeth Short's body, which was left on Norton in reality, which is in Leimert Park, Elizabeth Short's body was left off Degnan. Well, in reality, it's a couple of blocks from Degnan. He might as well say it was left off Crenshaw, but that doesn't suit his goofy purposes. So he'll say, oh, her body was left off Degnan. And again, he stole this idea. He'll say, well, it was a pointer to the killing, this terrible, terrible, tragic killing the year before in Chicago of a young girl named Suzanne Degnan. And then he drags in, would you believe it, more stuff that's stolen. Suzanne Degnan's, I think the parents' home was near a street called Hollywood. And again, Steve stole that idea. And finally, he'll say, well, Jean French, the body of Jean French, who was killed several weeks after Elizabeth Short was killed in February of 1947. Her body was left on Mountain View, which is the cemetery where Elizabeth Short is buried. Now, in reality, no, her body was not left on Mountain View. It is Steve just kind of twisting the facts and twisting the details to fit this weird, weird symmetry that he's come up with. It's just goofy. Anyway, here is part one of my reaction to Steve Hodel on yet another podcast. So long for now. This is Larry Harnisch with yet another Steve Hodel reaction video. I haven't listened to this podcast, which is From the Void. I know what Steve generally says, so just to make it interesting for me, I've made a Steve Hodel bingo card. Let's see how I do. Ready? Share screen. Let us share the screen. And away we go here. From the Void.
From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
The question, what if you found out that your father not only committed murder, But what if he turned out to be potentially one of the most prolific serial killers of all time?
What if? What if your dad was George Hodel? What if you were Buy My Bucks, Steve Hodel? Let's find out. I think we know where this is going.
What would you do?
I'd write
How
a lot
would
of
you
books.
react?
I would write a lot of books, which is what Steve Hodel did. Buy my books.
How might it change the ways in which you view the world? And what if what you thought was his first murder was only the tip of the
He didn't wake up one day and become a serial killer. 50 killings in 50 years. Oh, I know where this is going to go. All right, bring it on.
iceberg? What if you found countless potential victims going back decades? What do you do with that sort of information?
You write a whole bunch of books. That's what you do.
The love for a parent is so incredibly strong.
Yeah. Maybe not.
In death, can you separate a father from his horrific hidden life? Do you lie
Which you have made up entirely? Oh, wow. And I'm not even into Steve yet.
awake at night worrying that perhaps somewhere deep and dormant hides the same dark passenger? This week, we welcome back retired detective and best-selling author Steve Hodel to talk about his new books, The Early Years, The Further Serial Crimes of George Hill Hodel, M.D. Welcome to this week's mystery, The Black Dahlia Avenger, The Early Years.
The Black Dahlia Avenger meets Creature from the Black Lagoon. The Black Dahlia Avenger versus Godzilla. Bring it on.
From the Void.
Spooky music.
All right, welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to have Steve Hodel back on with me. Thank you for joining me again.
Oh, I'm excited to have Steve Hodel too. I can't tell you how excited I am.
Good to be back with you, John.
Absolutely. So last time we talked, it was season 2, and we talked about the fact that you were coming out with some new material on the
Constantly. Steve Hodel is constantly finding new clues because his case is so crappy.
early murders that you link your dad to. And so I think when we spoke, it was originally going to be one book and ended up being 2 books. So tell me about
2 books, a play, a rock opera, a book of haiku, children's letters to the Black Dahlia. Pardon me. Cut that. Yeah. Many books, a rock opera, a book of haiku, children's letters to the Black Dahlia Avenger. Yeah. On and on and on and on.
you obviously do meticulous research, which
Yeah. Obviously making up everything. That's how meticulous he is.
why I love your research, your books, because you dig deep. So tell me about what
Deep. Oh, yeah. Steve Hodel is known for digging deep, really deep, really deep.
happened that resulted in 2 books as opposed to 1.
Okay, well, actually,
Oh, wait a second. He's going to say this is all one continuous investigation. It's one really, really, really long book. Okay, let's see.
gotta catch you up. We're actually, it's now 8 books. 8.
Wow.
But I started out, of course, with, this whole thing began, as many of your listeners may know, who any have read my books, is that it started out with my father's death back in
I think we're heading into the photo album story.
1999. And I can't believe it, but it's now, 23 years later.
Yeah.
And it's my most recent books, The Early Years, which I just published.
Yeah, just self-published. I'll have to cut in to see what the ratings are currently. Last time I checked, they were 1.5 millionth on Amazon. Maybe they're doing a little bit better. Maybe people are giving them for the holidays. I don't know. We'll see.
some months ago is actually books 7 and 8. And as you say, I thought this would be book 2, the early years. I did, I started out with Black Dahlia Avenger. And of course,
I followed the evidence. I was trying to clear my dad.
as you may remember, I was confident my father had nothing to do with this. And I was going to show, with my background and stuff, I said, hey, in 10 seconds, I could show you he had nothing to do with it. Once I
Tamar, what are you talking about?
found out he was an actual suspect after his death. And I made the mistake of following the evidence.
Ah! That's one for sure.
The doors kept opening, and about a year and a half into it, almost 2 years later, it was pretty much a dead bag case against him as being the actual suspect on Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, which was that infamous murder from 1947. So,
let me point out that George Hodel was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder. He was under surveillance for 5.5 weeks and eliminated. Okay, 5.5 weeks, eliminated, cleared, done in late 49, 50. So, George Hodel had already been cleared and eliminated. So Steve's desire to clear his dad had already been done. And Steve knew that.
Was investigating that murder. Of course, I was doing a deep background search in regards to LA and its history, and of course, some of these crimes started popping up from the 40s and the 30s and the 20s, and I said, "What? No, there's no way."
He didn't wake up one day and decide to be a serial killer. Come on, Steve, you can do it.
Could be connected to these, but I was informed. I didn't know they existed. It was way before my time. But I became aware of these crimes as infamous whodunits. And by the time I got finished with my investigation, I said, I'm going to have to take another deep dive back into these early years because a lot of them sound like his crime signature, his MO.
Steve, they're all different. Every one of the crimes you talk about is different. They're all different from each other. How were you ever a cop?
So that'll maybe be book 2, but I'll get into that later. So I came out with the Black Dahlia Avenger in 2003, and
many editions of that, and Most Evil and Totally Evil and Beyond the Valley of Evil, and Beyond the Valley of the Black Dahlia Avenger.
Then I said, okay, I'll start with the early years. But actually, on the way, much to my surprise, once I got into the Dahlia investigation, I realized that he was responsible for a number of serial crimes in the 40s.
50 killings in 50 years. Come on, Steve, spit it out.
Which I named the LA Lone Woman murders. There was actually about a dozen murders.
All of them are different, Steve. Come on.
Before and just after the Black Dahlia murder in 47.
Are you going to talk about how your dad was in China for part of the war, or part of the 40s, I should say? Are you going to talk about that? Maybe.
So I got into those, and that took me into Black Dahlia Avenger 2, a second book, because it was just too much. So I came out and I basically...
Steve's books are definitely too much.
He presented the evidence that, in fact, not only did he kill the Black Dahlia, but he also was good for a dozen different serial crimes in the LA area.
Now, hang on, Steve. Let me point out that you've never laid the groundwork that any of these other killings were serial killings. I think that's kind of important. And again, all of these killings are different. They are totally unrelated. All different.
Just before and after. I got that book out. Then, let's see, let me think about the order here. So then there was a Black Dahlia Avenger 3, But again, a lot of this information I got from readers. You know, it was amazing.
Yeah, the armchair sleuth who helped Steve out and kind of reaffirm his goofy theories.
Armchair detectives. And they would send me an email and say, hey, Steve, what about this? And what about this? And that would open doors into not only more evidence, but also other crimes. And I got an email from a woman in Chicago. And
oh, is this going to be Suzanne Degnan?
She said, you know, I was going through my mother's belongings after she just recently passed. And there was an unopened letter there that was written by my grandfather back in 1949. And it lays out your father as the killer of the Black Dahlia. So here we have an unopened.
Oh, yeah. There's been some stuff written about this letter. It really is not the indictment that Steve thinks it is, but because of course not, because that's how Steve works.
3-page handwritten letter, basically saying I was friends with Dr. George Hill Hodel. I was also an informant for LAPD, a paid informant for LAPD, and he killed.
So, Steve, are you saying that the LAPD use paid informants? Really? Really? You want to talk about the history of that? Because I have never heard of the LAPD using paid informants. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but that's a new one to me.
Elizabeth Short, and also another crime that he mentions that he knew the victim and George knew the victim. So
yeah, I don't think that's been established. That's all very nebulous, Steve.
That was like a wow moment, you know, another huge confirmation. So I wrote it. That was BDA 3. I needed to include that, so I added that on. And
how about Zodiac? We got to Zodiac yet? How about the rock opera? How about the play? How about the book of haiku?
So then I said, okay, I'm going to get into the early years now. And I realized one of the crimes was, is a separate book called In the Mesquite.
Oh, yeah. In the Weeds. In the Weeds is a killing that occurred in Texas, and Steve has cobbled together some kind of bizarre evidence that his dad did that.
That documents a double homicide in Texas that I believe my father did.
Well, of course you believe it. You believe everything about your dad.
In 1938. And I was going to have that as the last of the early years crimes, but it was too much. It was definitely more than a chapter. There's no way I could do it in a chapter. So actually I wrote a separate book on that.
In the Weeds.
Mesquite.
In the Weeds.
And it documents and lays out all of the evidence connecting George Hodel to a mother-daughter kidnap, a very brutal, horrific murder. It's actually, the Texas Rangers consider it one of their most infamous unsolveds. So I came out with that.
But of course, we know that George Hodel, evil genius that he was, committed every unsolved killing on the planet, right? It's just, oh yeah, George Hodel did that. Yeah.
And presented that in a separate book. And I said, okay, I guess now I can jump into the early years. And much to my surprise, there was what I thought would be one book. There was just too much there, so it became 2 books. And so there's volume 1 or edition 1, the early years. Part 1 is the 1920s, and then volume 2 is the 1930s. And you know, I was a little concerned because it's like, oh, there he goes again. You know, where's he going to go next? The grassy knoll, you know?
Yeah, pretty much, Steve. You see George Hodel murders everywhere.
But basically, as I see it now, my father, Dr. George Hill Odell, really began amazingly in his teens. Was his first, I
50 killings in 50 years. Come on, come on, come on.
believe, was his first killing as a teenager. And he continued on and was never stopped through the 20s, through the
Because he knew too much, right? He knew too much.
30s, through the 40s, then jumped into the 60s with, you know about Zodiac. And
Zodiac!
I was very reluctant to go there. And
Oh, yeah. You think I'm tough on Steve Hodel. The Zodiac people just fry Steve Hodel over Zodiac. Yeah, yeah. Good to be cautious there, Steve.
those were the other two books before the early years. I got sucked into doing basically two books, Most Evil 1 and Most Evil 2. And as bizarre as it sounds,
Did he say that? As bizarre as it sounds, I guess Steve has some awareness after all.
you know, basically, I had no choice. I was pulled into look. I knew nothing about Zodiac. I mean, I knew it was a famous unsolved mystery.
We were busy with Manson, which the LAPD screwed up, and it was the sheriff's department. Go ahead, Steve.
Just go, but we had Manson at the same time in Los Angeles, and I was, I wasn't paying much attention to that other than I knew it was a serial killer up there. Didn't know any of the details or anything. So,
I was just walking along the street, officer, minding my own business, and this murder dropped on me. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Maybe I should tell you here's how I got sucked into that. I was basically one of George's crime signatures, his MOs, was posing bodies off street signs.
I sense Degnan coming on. This could be bodies found off Degnan.
Okay, and I talk about the three Chicago lipstick murders, and those were two adult murders he did in
Suzanne Degnan,
Chicago in pre-Dahlia, just a year before, and there were three victims, two adults and one child, and an 8-year-old by the name of Suzanne Degnan.
Yeah, we know where this is going.
Degnan. And they had a suspect on those, a guy named William Hirons, a teenager. And I said, well, that case was solved. But then I started looking into it and saying, well, wait a minute here. Apparently he was a teenager. It was a forced confession.
Yeah, that's not really how the Hirons case played out, Steve.
He was tortured for a number of days and threatened and eventually basically forced. Of course, Chicago, like LA, was very corrupt back then. They had a lot of...
Yeah, no, none of that's true. Okay, Hirons actually didn't talk for several days. And what Steve is talking about is, in actuality, Hirons took the investigators around and showed him where he had been. He had a long record of burglaries, and one of the houses he burglarized was very close to the Degnan home and had a view of of Suzanne Degnan's bedroom. Let me also point out that Hirons was experienced as a hunter, and he also was experienced in taxidermy. So he knew how to cut up animals somewhat. He was somewhat familiar with it. Let me just point that out, because you're never going to get that from Steve. Never.
Bad actors on the department.
Oh, and more important, Chicago does have a reputation for being, or did have, well, I don't know what it is now, but corrupt. Nothing at all like that in LA. Totally different. Absolutely totally different. No, that is total BS.
And basically, it was a huge crime. These three Chicago crimes, and they needed to get it solved. So they had about 4 or 5 suspects before they focused on Hirons, and basically forced him to testify. There was no trial, no evidence.
Yeah, Steve, let's pretend that we know a little bit about the legal system. Hirons didn't get a trial because he pleaded guilty. He confessed to it, rather. Okay, Hirons didn't get a trial because he confessed to it. If you confess to something, you don't get a trial. And as a cop, you ought to know that. This is utter BS.
Presented. He pled guilty. He was sent to prison, served 64 years in prison, died in prison.
Yep.
I went back and actually talked to him. I met him in prison and went back and talked to him. And clearly, there was a lot of evidence and an uproar back then that he was innocent.
Nah, not really. If you read the original news accounts, it was pretty clear that he was guilty.
A lot of people. But, they did things very different back then. And he was sent away and died in prison after 64 years. Heartbreaking to meet this guy, knowing my father was good for him.
No. Absolutely nothing. There's absolutely nothing to show that George Hodel was in Chicago or ever killed anybody. This is just Steve Hodel wishing things into reality. Crazy.
I mean, there was a whole bunch of things that the coroner there was absolutely sure that the little girl was killed by a skilled surgeon. There was
again, let me point out that William Hirons was a hunter. He knew how to dress game. He had done some taxidermy, and the manner in which Suzanne Degnan was cut up was in some ways skillful and in some ways very crude. That's the reality, which Steve will never tell you.
hemi-corporectomy performed on.
No. This alleged procedure that Steve talks about, the hemi-demi corporectomy, where a body's cut in half, that didn't exist in the 1940s. Steve has sort of willed that into existence, but no, not true. And it's very unclear whether Suzanne Degnan was cut in half. I don't think so. There's really almost nothing in the original news accounts to establish that. It is, again, Steve wishing that into reality.
By dividing the body in half, and the body was posed in the streets.
No, what are you talking about? No, the reality is that William Hirons killed Suzanne Degnan. He dismembered the body. He cut off the head and the arms and the legs and distributed these various body parts in storm drains in the neighborhood. He had been a delivery boy for a liquor store, so he was familiar with that area. That's what really happened. Suzanne Degnan was sure as heck not posed. The body was, and it's a horrible killing, the body was left in storm drains so that they would never be found, so that in the next heavy rain, everything would be carried away. That's what really happened. Honestly, Steve.
A whole bunch of stuff that is very similar to this year later Dahlia murder.
Not at all the same. That is a lie. That's a total lie.
Anyway, but on that, to get back to the street signs, on that.
Yes. Elizabeth Short's body was left off Degnan, like 2 effing blocks away off Degnan.
He posed the body off a street named, body parts off a street named Hollywood. Okay, come on, Steve, that's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, well, you know what, Steve? Actually, not only is that a bit of a stretch, but you stole that idea. As bad as that idea is, you stole it. You effing stole it. Shameful. There was a guy with a web address, something like Black Dahlia Solution Info, something like that. Absolutely nuts. Absolutely crazy. And all of these theories are there, and Steve Hodel just stole them all. It's incredible. People who don't know the Black Dahlia case cannot imagine how much Steve Hodel lies. You just can't imagine.
Yeah, he's from Hollywood, so big deal. So fast forward a year to the Dahlia murder, hemi-corporectomy, the same operation.
No, that operation alleged didn't exist in the 40s, Steve. That is a lie.
Performed a little girl. Dad poses the body on a vacant lot off a street named Degnan.
Okay. No. Elizabeth Short's body was found on Norton Avenue. It is a couple of blocks away. It is totally inaccurate to say her body was found off Degnan. That is just bull.
Right? D-E-G-N-N. I've never even heard that name before.
New to Steve. Therefore, it must be real.
Wow.
And again, so I said, well, geez, that's impressive, but.
You stole that idea, you stinker.
And I, of course, included that. So then, 3 weeks after the Dahlia murder is one of his another LA lone woman murder. And that was Jean French.
Oh, yeah. And he's going to say that her body was left off Mountain View because that's the cemetery where Elizabeth Short was buried. That's what he's going to go. And you know what? That's not true either. No, another lie.
And he poses her body off a street named Mountain View.
Yeah! What did I tell you?
And 3 weeks before Elizabeth Short was buried in Oakland.
Wait a minute. Elizabeth Short was killed 3 weeks before, and then 3 weeks after, and what? Your time sequence is all screwed up here, Stevie boy.
Family had her transported up there. She was buried in a cemetery. The name of the cemetery, Mountain View. So I said, oh, come on, Steve. He's playing these games.
Yeah, Steve, that's just a flat out lie.
So then I discovered that, of course, he fled.
Discovered? That's a new meaning of a new definition of discovered that we're not familiar with.
The country and went to Manila.
What? Whoa. Suddenly he's in Manila, but you forgot about his arrest on charges of molesting Tamar, which he didn't do, but he was arrested. And then he went to Hawaii, and now suddenly he's in Manila? Whoa. Gosh. Wow. Man.
To the 60s, in 1967, there's a similar Dahlia-like murder committed in Manila. It's 2 blocks from Dad's house. So, hemicorporectomy, the body's divided. Coroner there said it had to have been a skilled surgeon. And the body parts are posed on a vacant lot, just like they were with Dahlia, off a street named Zodiac.
Yeah, I'm not sure how close that really was to the street named Zodiac. I would have to check that map, which I probably will never do, but it's like, I mean, the first two examples, Degnan and Mountain View, that he is just manipulating the alleged facts so much that I really don't believe him at all. You really can't believe anything Steve says at this point.
What? So that kind of got my attention, and I said, well, I don't know anything about Zodiac. So I got into Zodiac, and I got into the weeds of it. I said, well, there's...
Yeah, as I said, the people who study the Zodiac case are just brutal about Steve Hodel. Man, they are brutal. Wow.
There's no way Zodiac was like 25 or 30 or something. Dad was 60. So there's no way.
Oh, I think it's too bad this isn't video, because Steve could show the alleged police drawing, which is actually a book cover, but he'll say it's a police sketch, but it's really a book cover, but he'll say it's a police sketch, because that is how Steve Hodel lies over and over and over.
Right, well, once I got into researching it, I came up with 2 additional law enforcement composites on Zodiac that were...
Oh, he is! He's going to call it... Oh, my God, the guy has no shame at all. He's going to call it a police composite, and it's a frickin' book cover. Oh, Steve. Oh, jeez. You are such a fucking liar.
Picture perfect to George Hodel.
No.
And I discovered the best witness was an Officer Fook with SFP, San Francisco Police Department. And he did this composite and said the guy was 35 to 45, but more like the high end. So 45 could have been 46 or 7 or 8.
Do I hear 49? Do I hear 50? Do I hear 51? Going once.
Dad was 60, but he looked 45. And
if you want him to look 45, I'm sure he did, Steve. Did you check out German facial recognition software, perhaps?
Composite drawing is picture perfect. I'm not exaggerating. It's picture.
It's a book illustration. It's not a police composite, you lying SOB.
Perfect to George Hodel. Glasses and everything.
Book illustration.
So I put that together and I came out with Most Evil, which was, and I didn't say he did it. I said, you know.
We present the facts, you decide. Where have I heard that before?
There's enough here, enough evidence here. Let's take a look. Let's do DNA. Okay. And then again, another reader, another email comes along. It's a high school teacher from France. And he says, and there, of course, Zodiac was famous for sending in taunting notes, letters, cryptograms, ciphers, all sorts of stuff, which of course Dad had done throughout his career.
No, we haven't established that at all. Steve has taken a whole bunch of crackpot mail and attributed all of it to his dad, which, first of all, we don't know it's from his dad. Second of all, it's never established that that was from the killer of anybody. But Steve is very big on recognizing his dad's handwriting. He loves to recognize his dad's handwriting.
Your earlier career, send in notes, catch it if you can. Anyway, and the same voice, the same handwriting. And this French high school teacher, Yves Persson, contacts me and says, the cipher, the symbol that he signed his name with on one of the letters, he says it's ancient Ogham language, the alphabet, which was an ancient Celtic alphabet. And he says there are 5.
Yeah, of course, the Hodels are well known as Russian immigrants for being Celtic. Yeah. Man, how does he get anybody to interview him with this utter garbage? How does that happen? They just have him on for laughs and giggles to listen to, let's see what crazy Steve Hodel has come up with next?
Letters. And he says the 5 letters are Hodel. That got my attention.
Yeah.
so basically, and I came up with a lot more evidence to the linkage and stuff. And I came out with most.
Linkage, more like stinkage, Steve. A lot like stinkage.
Evil 2, which says, yeah, he did do it, and here's why. It lays it out. So those 2 books popped up in between. Then eventually I got to the early years. I said, okay. I took a deep breath and I said, it's time to take a look at these.
I hope you didn't breathe too deeply, Steve. You might, the odor might be too much for you.
1920s and 30s crimes. So, you know, basically, book 1, part 1, does a lot of biographical information on my grandparents, his parents, his father and mother, and maybe we could do a little bit on that. They were George Goldgifter was his name. He was born in Kiev, Russia, and he, at age 21, of course he was Jewish, and at age 21 they were conscripted into the Tsar's army, and they were like almost like slaves. It was a terrible life. So George determined to get out of town, and he disguised himself as he was pretending to go see his sick grandmother, and got on the train, and he writes this amazing essay called Escape. And he lays out exactly how he did it, what he went through, how he was almost caught, but he makes it across the Polish line, and goes on, and it just assumes the name Hodel. I think it's a fairly common Swiss name.
But he never said he was Celtic, right? There's no real Celtic connection to the Hodels.
At any rate, he assumes the name Hodel, goes on to Paris, where he meets this attractive young woman by the name of Esther Leof. She was born in Russia, apparently of royalty. I haven't been able to exactly nail that down.
But you'd like it to be royalty, yeah. Steve's not good at nailing things down, shall we say?
But and she was a Russian, and she was a dentist in Paris in 1901. Amazing, very unusual for a woman to be a dentist in Paris at that age. And so they fall in love and they get married, and they come through Ellis Island back in 1903, I think it was. And they're in New York for a short time, then they come west to Los Angeles. And George, they have one son, he's George Hodel Jr. And
yeah, pay close attention to the George Sr. and George Jr. thing, because, spoiler alert, the Sowden House, or the Franklin House, or whatever Steve is going to call it, was never owned by George Hodel Jr., his dad. It was owned by George Hodel Sr. and rented to George Hodel Jr. He never owned it. Steve won't tell you that, but that's what really happened.
And he's born in 1907. And then
Genius IQ, playing concerts at Shrine Auditorium. Is that coming up?
I can't recall if we did his bio on an earlier podcast with you or not, but it was, I don't know if we want to go through it.
Remarkable life. He was a remarkable man.
His bio or not, but it's pretty amazing, an exceptionally amazing individual.
Yeah, talk a little bit of.
Oh yeah,
I think,
yeah. Tell us about your dad's biography. I want to get the Genius IQ. Come on.
What might be interesting is to talk a little bit about. Obviously, we talked about the fact that he was a brilliant mind, very, very smart, very intelligent.
Right.
I think we talked about obviously his training as a doctor, but what's really interesting, and you dive deeper, I think, into this in these early books, is his even going back further in his childhood, he was a prodigy and
played concerts at Shrine Auditorium. Come on.
There are a lot of interesting things that kind of set him up to kind of understand the police system and crime and all these sorts of things.
I forgot all his career as a reporter. Dang.
From his essays to his ride-alongs. So talk a little bit about, and talk a little bit about his parents too, because you kind of wonder anytime we come across a serial killer, what was their childhood like?
Yeah, George Hodel, not serial killer, and his childhood.
Like, was it abusive? Was it fairly normal?
Right.
What was that like?
Yeah, well, again, you're right. I mean, as a child, of course, at age 6, he started playing piano. And by age 9,
concerts at Shrine Auditorium. Come on.
And he was a child prodigy pianist, playing his own concerts at the Shrine Auditorium.
Yeah, got it. Genius IQ, come on. Genius IQ is next.
Los Angeles, highly gifted. His music teacher said he's going to go far as a pianist. Very high IQ. He tested out at 186.
No, he didn't. Nah, that's a lie too. His George Hodel's IQ, in the records of the Lewis Terman study, was about 100. As I recall, it's 151, not 186. No. Even that's wrong. What a liar.
1 point above Einstein.
Yeah, let me point out that Einstein never took an IQ test. He was an adult, and it was all speculative what his IQ would have been. So saying it was 1 point higher than Einstein is absolute garbage.
That skips a generation, but my boys are...
Oh! Ha. Steve made a joke. Ha.
in good shape. and his parents, his father was an accountant, got into real estate sales.
Yeah, his dad was a real estate investor, a real estate speculator, that kind of thing. Yeah, that is actually true. That's what happened.
His mother, and I try and look at a number of these triggers, and it's a bit difficult, but his mother was also brilliant mind, but also very controlling. And he was very much like let's say, a little Lord Fauntleroy type. She saw him as, far, far better than any other child around in his age, which in many respects he was. But he was extremely pampered, but she was also very controlling. I write in the books about one incident that my mom told me. He said, your father really hated his mother. I said, why would he hate his mother? And she said, well, she was very controlling.
Let me guess, she didn't let him play baseball with the other boys. Was that it? She made him practice piano. Was that the deal?
And she gave me an example that Dad had told her. He said, apparently he came in after his piano practice and said, Mom, can I go out and play baseball with the boys now?
Bingo.
She said, no, Georgie, you're a pianist, not a baseball player. You'll hurt your hands. That kind of thing.
God, that must be lifted out of some old movie.
I think also incest. I suspect there was sexual abuse.
On the basis of what? On the basis of what? Just because you want it to be true? That's it?
Either from his mother or from some other family member. What we know is when he grew up, he turned into a real monster, a misogynist.
Yeah, we don't know that. That's just because you want him to be that. We don't know that at all. It's all made up by you. Honestly.
Of the highest order, a sadist. Not only did he take pleasure in his killings, but he took...
What killings? He never killed anybody.
Pleasure in the torturing and the beating and the slow.
There is no evidence for any of that. Nothing. Steve has just built his dad into this fictional character. It's really bizarre.
Killing. He was also a nihilist. He hated humanity.
Yeah, that's why you become a doctor, is because you hate humanity. Okay. Really? And that's why you participate in these 10-year reports to Lewis Terman, because you hate humanity. How does that make any sense at all?
I think probably congenital insanity is part of it. He was rejected not only by his peers and his fellow students because he was so far much more advanced.
Yeah, I don't think that's really true. I mean, he seems to have been a fairly popular young man, according to the news accounts of the day. If he didn't like people, if he hated humanity, why did he throw all these big parties for the Hollywood luminaries that he supposedly threw? You can't have it both ways, Steve. It just doesn't work like that.
That's for them. I mean, he went to Caltech at age 14.
Oh, sexually precocious. Here it comes. Has an affair with a professor's wife. Well, maybe she was a professor's wife. I don't know. I'm trying to find it out. I'm asking the armchair sleuths to help me find out who this woman was and if they really had a kid. But here's the story anyway, because I'd like it to be true.
Actually, he just turned 15. He entered Caltech.
George, you're a child yourself.
Caltech University, 2 or 3 years ahead of his age group. And of course, I think he was rejected. He was probably what we call today a super nerd, And
right.
I think he was rejected on many counts, many fronts. So all of this came together kind of in a perfect storm to create this.
Oh, we're not going to get into the professor's wife? Oh, Steve, you disappoint me.
Hatred of humanity, hatred of people and stuff. but he was also extremely handsome, extremely.
So George Hodel hated humanity, which is why he went with the UN to China, because he hated humanity so much. This doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense at all.
Charming, highly.
How can you be charming if you hate humanity? What in the world is going on?
Educated, extremely well read. You know, he knew everything and anything, and he had this ability when he would walk into a room, and everybody would gravitate to him, and it would be like you're in the presence of the Pope. He had that kind of charisma and charm.
But he hated humanity, and he was nihilistic and everything. Oh, wow. How does that even remotely make sense? And the moderator here is just eating it up. No challenge at all. Just, yeah, tell me more, man.
And he could speak on anything at length. And so, I mean, I was, you know, I loved my father.
Yeah, you loved him so much that you accused him of all these murders. That's how much you loved your dad, Steve.
I was, you know, enamored with his amazing abilities, and never suspected that there might be this monster inside of him.
That's because there wasn't.
And that's the other thing that we see in a number of his mailings and notes.
He never did any of that stuff. It's all made up.
Cries out, "Help me, I can't stop this thing inside of me." He actually, you know, comes out and says it in his writings to some of the police after his crimes. And I think it was very much like a Jekyll and Hyde. You know, I always thought that was a nice, interesting fiction, but actually,
nice.
You know, it was true with George. I mean, you love the doc. I love the Dr. Jekyll, the charming, amazing man that could do anything. And then I was unaware of this Mr. Hyde, this monster inside of him. So you know, that's what for whatever it started out very early, and actually in the early years, the first crime I look at, he was 14.
Oh, definitely a child prodigy of serial killers, Steve. Yeah, sure.
And you say, how is this possible? Well, you got to remember.
Well, it isn't possible. That's how.
There's probably a middle age there of 35 or so.
What?
And a 14-year-old back in 1921 was not the same as a 14-year-old today.
What does that mean?
They were driving cars. They were, you know, doing
No, they weren't driving cars at 14. No.
A lot of the things that you wouldn't expect of a 14-year-old. And he was so advanced. So his first murder in the early years, the first one I present, is I believe he killed a priest up in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Right, because he's 14 years old, he's living in LA, so why not go up to San Francisco and kill a priest? Sure, that makes sense. What do you want to bet the host isn't going to challenge him at all and say, gee, Steve, how did he do that?
Dr. Father Heslin. And
oh, is this the Hightower thing? There's some Hightower thing that Steve goes on and on and on and on about. Maybe this is it.
That was a kidnap shooting. He actually shot him in the head. And it was a ruse. He drove up, said, my friend is dying. I need you to do the last rites for the father in this small town in Colma, California. Gets his last rites stuff together and goes with him in the car. Never comes back. And he's found later shot and buried in a shallow grave not too far away. And again, that was his first Zodiac killing.
Okay, so this killing that George Hodel didn't do, notice that the victim was shot. Notice that the victim was buried, so the body's not put on display. So how is Steve going to establish a signature as much as anybody is going to challenge him on that other than me.
In the sense that he taunts the police, he writes letters, he sends them to the San Francisco Chronicle.
Let me point out that writing letters to the newspaper was a very common thing to do. A lot of pranks, a lot of prank mail, crackpots. Very common. Surprisingly common, as a matter of fact.
There's very much a lot of the signatures that will come later in the Zodiac.
Yeah, except for not putting the body on display and not mutilating it, not cutting it in half and all of that. Oh, oops. That's how similar it was.
Right. So.
Oh, and it was in San Francisco when he was living in LA at the age of 14. Thank you very much, Steve. How do people fall for this stuff? How?
It's pretty amazing. And then we go on. There are actually 4 crimes in the 20s that he commits. And on the Degnan crime, that bothered me a lot because I had had no child murders before. And it's like,
wait a minute. Wait a minute. Now, Steve has this story about when he was a detective, he had to put aside his feelings and he would interview this guy who had allegedly just killed his kid and all that sort of thing. So what's this going to be all about?
You know, why is there just this one child murder? Well, sadly, there's not. In the early years, there's actually 6 child murders.
What?
Yeah, and in the 20s and 30s, and very much following his same signature and stuff, writing to the.
Yeah, his signature of putting bodies on display or not, or mutilating them or not. Wow.
Press the letters, his handwriting on and on.
Steve always recognizes his dad's handwriting. He loves to recognize his dad's handwriting.
So there's the 4 in the 20s, and then there's I think there's like another 16 in the 30s.
What? Okay.
And once we get into the 30s, so he's committing these crimes in the Bay Area, but most of them are in the LA area.
Most of them in the Bay Area, but he's committing them in the LA area. Okay, that's sure. Oh yeah, sure, that's fine.
Back to Los Angeles and begins a series of crimes with, again, child murders. And again, it's taunting the police. One of them.
Now, this is interesting because Steve will say, oh yeah, my dad liked to taunt the police. But he will also say, well, they never arrested my dad because he knew too much. So he was taunting the police, but they knew he did it, but he was taunting them. But he, it's like, what is he talking about?
One of the child murders is very close, just a few months from the Lindbergh kidnap murder. Well, of course, Lindbergh was headlines for weeks, and the trial and everything. And I think, again, the super ego, he says, well, they didn't get away with it, but I can. So he does a copycat Lindbergh murder of.
What?
2 little girls, leaves them in a culvert, just like the Lindbergh boy was.
Now, is Steve talking about these 3 little girls who were killed in Inglewood? Because if he is, he's got that all screwed up too. That was most likely done by a guy named Albert Dyer, who was convicted and executed for killing 3, not 2, 3 little girls of Inglewood. Let's see if Steve's got this at all right, or there's some other kids he's talking about.
Found, but basically that is actually solved. The LAPD or the DA's office actually hires this European detective, and he gets on the case. It's a doctor. I'm blanking on his name right now, but anyway, he's known as the Ferret of Europe.
Interesting nickname.
And he gets on it, and he takes up lodging in the Biltmore Hotel, which is the brand new Biltmore Hotel of all places. Of course, that's where Elizabeth Short was last seen leaving out of in the 40s. Anyway, he gets on it, and he says, I've solved it. And he comes up with two names of two individuals, and he says, and this is why, and he connects it again to the Lindbergh. He thinks it's a copycat for the Lindbergh, and he actually gives the two names. Well, the names are never released, and I'm very confident that if they probably have been disposed of like everything else has in my findings, but I'm very confident those two names would have been George Hodel and Fred Sexton. And Sexton is an accomplice of his in many of his crimes.
No, that's all wrong too.
Throughout the time, and he leaves and flees to Mexico when Dad leaves and flees to.
Yeah, Steve is always big on having people flee just before the police are about to close in. The corrupt police who covered up murders were about to sweep down, only they weren't, but he knew too much. This host is really just letting Steve blather.
Away. And so basically, I think that they were given the names, and for whatever reason why
they knew too much, obviously,
are released and never followed up on.
Okay, this is not the Albert Dyer case. This is something else, and he hasn't named the victims. I'm not that familiar with the 20s, like I am with the 40s. So let's see. Let's see what Steve has next.
And so that then we get into the 30s, and what I discover is, well, there are a lot of very infamous.
Oh, wait a second. I take that back. The three girls in Inglewood, that was the Depression case. I beg your pardon. Yeah, that was a Depression case in the 30s. Sorry.
All crimes that I look at, some very well-known ones that are long forgotten, but were prominent in headlines for weeks and months. There's a number of crimes in the early years, again, like irons that are, an innocent person is convicted. Tragically, one of the most heartbreaking is on one of Dad's crimes, they pick up a 32-year-old man who's a crossing guard.
Oh, this is the Albert Dyer case. Okay, yeah. And opinions vary. I think he probably did it. There's a book that makes an interesting case that he didn't do it. I happen to think that he did.
And they basically get him to confess. Again, torture.
Yeah, well, let me point out that Dyer, I don't know if he took them to where the bodies were. No, he didn't. The bodies were found by some Boy Scouts. I take that back. I'm a little rusty on the murders of the 30s, but those girls' bodies were found by a couple of Boy Scouts.
Threatening words. He's got an IQ of 65, and
not 1 point short of Einstein, obviously, or 1 point ahead of Einstein.
Basically, the cops say, look, either you confessed it, and there's a mob outside of the courthouse yelling and chanting to hang him, yelling out his name. And
I'm not sure that was outside the courthouse. Let's back up to reality here. Those little girls were killed. The bodies were found in, I believe it was the Baldwin Hills, and they had all been strangled, sexually assaulted and strangled. But they were from Inglewood. Albert Dyer was a crossing guard in Inglewood. And in my opinion, he most likely did it. Not sure it was the courthouse. I'm not sure that Inglewood had a separate courthouse. Might have been City Hall or the police station, some civic building, something like that.
Detectives say, well, look, you have a choice. Either you confess or we'll let you go out there and talk to those people. So this, Poor guy is.
Yeah, let me point out that Albert Dyer worked very hard to insert himself into the investigation of these murders. And he was showing up all the time. It isn't just some random guy down the street.
Okay,
No.
yeah, I did it. And of course, he's not able to tell them anything about what actually happened. These are 3 little girls that were kidnapped, raped, and brutally murdered in the nearby hills in Los Angeles, in Inglewood, known as the Inglewood Babes. And
that's actually true. He actually got something right.
Of course, the description is perfect for George. They have composites that look just.
I'm not sure of that. Yeah, I don't know about that. It doesn't sound right.
Like he did back then. And they have witnesses, little girls in the park who saw them with 2 men drive off. Anyway,
I'm pretty sure rather than driving off, Dyer made them walk. I mean, Dyer's story, I think, was that he was going to show these little girls where some rabbits were, and he made them walk a long, long way. It is a horrific case, for sure. But I'm pretty sure Albert Dyer did it.
Poor guy, his name is Dyer, and Dyer is tried, convicted, and hung, executed for a crime that he did not commit.
Yeah, well, he was hanged, but I'm pretty sure he did it.
And it's not just me saying he didn't commit it. Back then, there was a huge outrage of people, an uproar, and lots of defense, community defense people saying, look, you know, he didn't do this, you can't do that. And, you know, again, a lot of corruption. So.
What do you mean a lot of corruption? I mean, if you read the original news accounts covering the Albert Dyer case, there is absolutely no question that Albert Dyer killed these 3 little girls. None. And let me point out that Paul DeRiver did a long interview with Albert Dyer, which I think is in DeRiver's book, The Sexual Criminal.
And then there's another case, another crime he does on another child kidnapped, and an older security guard in his 60s is convicted. Fortunately, he's not hung. He gets life and eventually gets out after 30 years. But
that's pretty typical with a life sentence is 20 or 30 years. Yeah, that's pretty typical.
You know, basically, and then we get into. So that was what I thought would be one book turns out to be 2 books, and it's just he never stops. I mean, basically, I discovered that there's a series of crimes in San Diego, and a serial killer.
What do you know? There were murders in San Diego. Who knew? And of course, George Hodel did them because George Hodel did every killing. He did them all.
And in the 30s and the 40s. And San Diego.
Now, let me point out that in the 30s, George Hodel was living in the Bay Area. He was a college student, then he was a medical student. So how he managed to magically get down to San Diego to kill some people is like, only in Steve World does that kind of thing happen, where Dad will just magically appear, kill some people, and on his way.
Diego PD has come up with this. They have connected 9 of them. It's not Steve saying these are connected, it's San Diego saying these are connected. And of course, they didn't have the term serial killer back then.
They were called chain murders. Got that from me.
But what they call them
chain murder.
Chain crimes. Chain related.
Chain
crimes. And they put these together in the 30s. Again, children, young adults, women, middle-aged women. He's all over the map on Vic.
Yeah, let me point out that that's very unusual. Very unusual to just be all over the map like that. That's kind of not how it works. Man.
Victims, there's no, real. So they connect.
There's no consistency except Steve wants them to all be related. That's the link.
To all of these, and incredibly, I'm reading, and I find out that the San Diego detectives in the 40s that are taking over and have all of these serial crimes, they actually have a murder that I had included in Black Dahlia Avenger, one of the Lone Woman murders, a San Diego murder of an adult who went to a dance hall and met this George. They leave together and he kills her. Anyway, they think this is also one of the serial crimes, even though it's 1947. They think it's related to their others. They actually, San Diego PD actually.
You point out that George Hodel was in China for most of 1947 because you're never going to hear that. No, I take that back. George Hodel was in China for most of 1946. 47, he was back in LA. Yeah.
He comes to LAPD, says, "Hey, we think this crime is maybe connected to the Black Dahlia," you know, and LAPD guys say, "Yeah, go away. No connection. Go away. You know, not connected."
Yeah. There was a lot of that. There were a lot of different police agencies looking for any kind of similarities. And reality check, there are none. There is nothing like the Black Dahlia case before or after. Now, Steve Hodel will argue with that because he wants the Black Dahlia case to be a serial killing, and he wants his dad to be a serial killer. But guess what? Just because he wants it doesn't mean it's true. No, didn't happen. Nope. Mm-mm.
And so they do. You know, they go back and it's forgotten. So even, you know, again, it's rewarding for me to have, you know, I can talk for 100 hours about how all of it.
Steve's got that right. He can talk for 100 hours. Oh yeah.
Comes together, but to have it verified or suspected by outside actual law enforcement agencies is another matter, and that's happened a number of times, so it's very rewarding. I guess, you know, and so basically the early years in the 20s and 30s cover, I think it's 24 murders. Now, I'm not saying that he did all of these.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that he did them, but I'm not saying that he didn't do them. It's just, here's the evidence, you decide. But I think he did them.
Murders. I'm saying you decide. Here's the evidence.
Yeah.
On every one of them, even though some of them are over the evidence.
You know, and Steve's concept of evidence is just so terrible. And he will tell you this is the evidence, and it's like, nah, none of this is true. He just lied his head off.
This is overwhelming, and I think would be fileable just based on what I have. I'm saying to the reader, you decide. You know, here they are. You know, he may be good for all of them. He may be good for some of them. I leave it open. Some of the evidence is much stronger on some than others. Let's see what else. I kind of see.
Buy my books. Buy my books.
I kind of see Dad. I've come to this. So now we have 48 murders in.
Oh, now wait a minute. Did we eliminate 2? Because Steve has been saying 50 murders in 50 years. That's been his refrain. So let's see.
50 years.
Oh, 48 in 50 years.
And I kind of see him like I just recently, a few days ago, actually came up with this. I kind of see Dad in a way as a man-eating tiger, and on the loose, and he's going to keep killing until he's stopped.
Yeah, except he stopped killing when he got remarried, right? Isn't that what happened? Isn't that your story?
Or he dies, or he's imprisoned.
Yeah, but he did it. If your dad was a killer, which he wasn't, he then stopped killing.
And I think that's what happened. He started in the 20s and never stopped.
He didn't wake up one day and decide to be a serial killer.
And I came across a article recently. It's called the Champawat tiger. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
I hadn't either. And it's he holds the Champawat tiger, also known as the Champawat demon or the Champawat devil. It was a tigress on the loose in
a tigress. So it's a lady tiger.
India and Nepal. And the tigress holds the world record for killings. 436 documented victims.
Wow.
Over 7 years. And finally, they hired an Englishman, Jim Corbett, who hunted it down finally and shot it, killed it. Well, I don't want to get into the woo-woo of this, and I'm not supporting.
Oh, let's get into the woo-woo. Bring on the woo-woo. Woo-woo!
This, I'm just going to present the facts. The tiger was shot and killed after 7 years of killing, 436 victims. It was shot and killed in 1907. Dad was born in 1907.
Wow. Imagine that.
I'm not saying there's any connection, but
you know, is the host laughing with Steve Hodel, or is he laughing at how crazy this sounds? I just wonder. You know, do people have Steve Hodel on just to listen to him blather about all his dad's crazy killings or his crazy killing theories about his dad? Is it just a joke at this point? I don't know.
Well, for those that are mystically or metaphysically inclined,
yeah,
the spirit of the tigress enter him. I'll leave that.
Yeah, the spirit of the tigress entered George Hodel. Wow.
For you to decide. But I just thought it was meaning. But my point being that, you know.
Do you have a point? Oh, God. Okay.
The tiger, and apparently what they discovered, this Jim Corbett became a conservationist and gave up his hunting values and became very supportive of animal, protection and stuff after that. And what he discovered was that apparently the tigress had a broken jaw and had been shot by someone or somewhere, and he believed that it was revenge. That the tiger was actually became a revengeful killing.
Yeah, and are we going to say that George Hodel was the Avenger, the Black Dahlia Avenger, and so therefore the avenging tigress was reincarnated as George? Is he really going to say that? No, he's not going to say that. No. Please tell me no.
Machine. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But we do know that the tigress did kill 436 people, and until it was brought down, that was a 7-year span. So I kind of see Dad in that same light. For whatever reason.
Was he shot in the jaw? Maybe? Was that it?
And then we've talked about some of them that caused him to become so hateful of humanity and people.
He was so hateful of humanity that he became a doctor, okay, that he wanted to help people, that he ran a clinic for people. That's how much he hated humanity. That just doesn't make any sense at all. None.
He began it and never stopped. And just
no, wait a minute, wait, Steve, because in other interviews elsewhere you say that he married his last wife and that's when he quit killing. Now you're saying he didn't quit killing? Which is it? What?
This was this tiger roaming basically California, although he did to get to other places.
Yeah, the jet-setting tiger serial killer.
But most of his kills were in California, northern and southern. And, you know.
And Chicago, and Manila, and wherever. Wherever Steve wants his dad to be, that's where his dad was.
At this point, I've been through every possible emotion you can go through. Because I think it's very clear.
Except a desire for reality. Reality is something that Steve is not real familiar with anymore.
I loved my father.
Yeah, sure he did. Yeah, I don't think so. The real story about Steve Hodel and his dad, Steve and his brothers were in the custody of their mom, okay, who was a drunk, who went to jail for child neglect. And Steve and his brothers kind of knocked around as young children. George never made any attempt to get custody of those kids. And if I can fault George Hodel for anything, it's not getting custody of Steve and his brothers when the mom was an absolute wino. That was wrong. What happened in the end is I think the Hodel kids all decided, oh, well, the old man is rich, and when he dies, he's going to leave us a lot of money. Big surprise, he didn't. And so Steve has spent the last 20-something years trying to cash in on Dad because Dad didn't leave him any money. That's the real story about Steve Hodel. It's all about money. It's all about money.
Tremendous respect for him. When I started out, I was confident I would be able to show he had nothing to do with these crimes.
That had already been done. He had been eliminated decades ago. That is utter bull. Utterly.
And then in following the evidence.
No, you didn't follow the evidence. You made it up.
It took me 180 degrees in the opposite direction. And, I've been through every possible emotion you can think of. Anger, hatred for this monster inside of him. And now I'm just at a point where it's just a terrible sadness. I mean, it's such a waste with his.
What's a waste? What's a waste is Steve Hodel spending the last 20-something years making up all this crazy stuff about his dad, none of which is true. And it gets more and more outlandish all the time. That's what's sad, because Steve has wasted the last 20 years of his life on this stuff.
Intelligence and abilities. He could have cured cancer. He could have done so much for humanity, and sadly, he became this monk.
Sadly, he became a doctor and helped people. Never killed anybody. No.
Instead.
No.
And
no.
He was good at, he was good at everything he did. And sadly,
he was good at everything he did except being a father. He was a crummy father. He didn't really show any interest in any of the kids that he fathered in America. And that would be Steve and his brothers, that would be Tamar, that would be Duncan, that would be various other offspring. I think maybe with the kids in the Philippines, he was more involved in their lives. But here it was like, he just wasn't involved. He was a crummy father. That was his big crime.
Choosing this profession as serial killer, he was, I think he's probably right up there, one of the worst, if I'm right. And of course, we know I'm right in many of the cases.
No, we don't know you're right in anything. No.
Cases. And I'll leave it to the reader to decide whether he's good for these. And it could well be that he's good for half of them or more of them, all of them. I don't know. But
none.
Some I have much stronger evidence than others.
And at that point, the internet died. So let's go back and pick up with Steve Hodel. Ready? Here we go. We're almost done, if that matters.
Basically, the other thing is, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but we're coming out with a docu-series.
Oh, the mini-series. Yes. Steve is working on a miniseries. It's called Don't Hold Your Breath. Yeah, we're waiting for that one.
Books. This will be the first 5.
He's already done 40 hours of interviews or something like that.
It'll be Dahlia, Lone Woman Murders, Zodiac, Manila, Lucilla Lou Murder in Manila, and the Chicago. So those are the first 5 books. So it'll include those. It'll probably be, I don't know, 4 or 5 part mini docu-series. So we hope to have that out next year.
Don't hold your breath.
And you know, my goal has always been to just get this out. And
well, I guess that's sort of true. His goal has always been to cash in on dear old dad who didn't leave him a dime when he died, or didn't leave him much. We'll put it that way.
Hopefully it'll bring some kind of solace to the distant relatives, you know, all of the living witnesses. And
yeah, solace to the living witnesses, solace to the family members. Steve is not real popular with certain members of the Hodel family. Let's put it that way.
Victims' families are mostly gone now, but they certainly have relatives.
Oh, wait. He's talking about the families of the alleged victims, not his own family. I beg your pardon. I misunderstood. Yeah, I'm sure they'll love Steve cashing in on their tragedies to sell books. I beg your pardon.
Stuff, and I think just the knowing of who done it, you know, that
he didn't done nothing, not nothing.
Brings some relief and solace. It's not going to take away the pain and the anguish that they suffer, but it will give some.
They'll be happy to know that a retired LAPD detective is padding around, going on the radio, going on television, going on podcasts, saying, "Oh yeah, my dad did all of this stuff," and kind of cashing in on their tragedy. I'm sure they'll be happy about that, Steve. Yeah.
Relief. And that's always been my goal, has been to accomplish that.
Oh, spooky music. Are we done?
Thanks for listening to part 1 of the Black Dahlia Avenger, The Early Years. I'll be back next week with part 2. If you enjoyed this or any of the previous episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review, and please tell a friend. Until next time, you've been listening to From the Void.
So long from the void. So long. That's all, folks. Bye-bye. Okay.